All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're looking at something that's probably on a lot of your minds.
Hmm.
The future of fire and emergency services in Edmonds. Yeah, we've got a consultant report, some budget proposals, even some pretty lively discussions from local news sites you sent over. And man, seems like everybody's got an opinion, especially about the potential costs.
It was a hot topic.
Yeah, so we're going to break it down. This consultant report, it doesn't mess around. They really get into it, like
What?
analyzing Edmonds demographics,
Oh, yeah.
even the risk levels of different building types.
Saw that. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? Super detailed stuff. But hey, that's what makes this deep dive so valuable, right? We can cut through all the noise, all the opinions, and get to the facts so you can really understand what's going on.
Absolutely. Give folks the information they need.
Exactly. So let's do it. Let's get started. Edmonds is a beautiful city, right, on Puget Sound, population over 40,000. And right now they contract with South County Fire, Regional Fire Authority for fire and EMS services.
Yeah.
The RFA, now this contract, it's set to expire in 2025. So the clock is ticking and they need to decide what's next. You know, what's interesting is Edmonds actually used to have its own fire department. They switched over to this contract model back in 2010.
Makes this decision even bigger. They've seen both sides.
Exactly, yeah. So now it's
Yeah.
like, okay, what have we learned? What's the best path forward? So what are the options? Well, the consultant report, it lays out four main paths. First one, annexation into the South County Fire RFA.
Okay.
Second, contracting with neighboring shoreline fire.
Makes sense.
3, creating a brand new Edmonds Fire Department.
Starting from scratch. Wow.
Yeah, and finally, option 4, separating fire and EMS altogether. Talk about a tough choice, right?
No kidding.
Lots to consider.
Yeah, but the good news is that consultant report really digs into the pros and cons of each option, analyzes costs, response times, level of control.
The whole 9 yards.
Yep. So let's start with that first option, annexation into the South County Fire RFA. It seems to be kind of the front runner in a lot of ways. So what makes it so appealing? Well, first off, the report estimates that joining the RFA could save Edmonds money, like a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. How much are we talking?
Like $6.5 million compared to some of the other options?
Wow, that's not chump change.
No, not at all.
But what about the quality of service, right? Would residents see any change in their fire and EMS response times?
That's the thing. The report suggests they would probably stay the same, maybe even get better.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, the RFA, they've already got a solid system in place, trained personnel, well-located stations. They've got a good track record in other communities.
So it's not like they're starting from square one.
Nope, they hit the ground running.
So lower costs, potentially better service. Sounds like a win-win so far. But I'm guessing there are some concerns out there, right?
Well, for sure, there always are.
Like what are people worried about?
One of the big ones that comes up a lot is this idea of losing local control. Some folks are worried that if they join the RFA, decisions about fire and EMS, they'll be made by, this regional authority instead of directly by the city of Edmonds.
Right, like they're giving up some power.
That's the fear, yeah.
It's understandable, though. People want to feel like they have a say.
Of course. It's their community.
So how do you address that concern?
Well, the key thing to remember is that the RFA, it's governed by elected officials. Officials who are accountable to the communities they serve, including Edmonds.
So it's not like some faceless bureaucracy is calling the shots.
Not at all. Edmonds residents would still have a voice at the table.
Right, they get to vote.
Exactly. Plus, when you're part of a larger organization, you often have more clout.
That's a good point. Strength in numbers.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of what people are saying, you've been looking at those online discussions, right?
I have spent some time in the comment sections.
What's the general vibe out there? What are Edmonds residents saying about all this?
Well, it's a mixed bag, You've got some folks who are all in on joining the RFA. They like the cost savings. They like the idea of being part of this bigger, more robust organization.
Yeah, sounds like they're looking at the big picture.
They are. They see it as a pragmatic move.
But I'm guessing not everyone's sold on the idea.
You got it. There's definitely a vocal group who are expressing some concerns.
Such as?
The main one I'm seeing is worry about potential tax increases.
Ah, the dreaded tax hike.
People are worried that if Edmonds joins the RFA, their property taxes will go up.
That's a big fear for a lot of people.
It is. And, it's understandable. Nobody wants to pay more taxes.
Right, especially if they're not sure they're getting something better in return.
Exactly. So we have to look at the facts.
Yeah, let's get into those numbers.
Okay, so the RFA, they've put out their proposed budget for 2025, and it does show some increases planned.
Okay, but is that because of the RFA itself, or is it just, the way things are going these days?
That's a great question. And from what I'm seeing, these increases, they're mainly driven by factors that are impacting costs across the board. Inflation, the rising cost of equipment, population growth. It's not just an RFA thing, it's happening everywhere.
Right, so these cost increases, they'd be there regardless of whether Edmonds joins the RFA or not.
Most likely, yeah.
And actually, you could argue that going it alone and creating their own fire department, that might even be more expensive in the long run.
You could, because they wouldn't have those economies of scale the RFA has.
Right, they'd be starting from scratch, buying everything new.
Exactly.
So those folks who are worried about tax hikes, they might be missing the bigger picture.
It's possible, yeah, focusing too much on one piece of the puzzle.
Okay, now what about service levels? Are people worried about response times or the quality of care if the RFA takes over?
Definitely some chatter about that online.
Yeah, like what if things get slower or less reliable?
Exactly. People are wondering, can the RFA really maintain the same level of service Edmonds has now?
So how do we know?
Well, it's important to remember that the RFA has a very specific system for determining response times and staffing levels. It's not just a random guess, it's all based on data and best practices.
Okay, so it's a calculated approach.
It is. Plus, the RFA, they have a proven track record, right? They're already successfully serving other communities in the region.
So there's no reason to think they wouldn't bring that same level of expertise to Edmonds.
Exactly. It's about looking at the evidence, not just speculating.
Makes sense. So we've covered annexation, but what about that second option? Contracting with shoreline fire.
Interesting one, for sure.
Yeah, I bet that appeals to some folks, especially those who are hesitant about joining the RFA.
You're right, it does have some appeal, keeping things local, but there
Yep.
are some complications.
Oh.
Yeah, the main one being those pesky county lines.
Ah, right. Edmonds is Snohomish County, Shoreline is King County.
Exactly. So you're talking about crossing jurisdictional boundaries, which always adds complexity,
And then more paperwork, probably.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so county lines are an issue.
And then there's the EMS systems. Shoreline, they operate under King County's Medic One, which is totally different from what South County Fire uses.
Oh, so integrating those two systems would be a nightmare.
It could be, yeah, a logistical and financial headache.
And on top of all that, isn't it more expensive than joining the RFA?
That's what the report says, yeah, significantly more expensive.
Okay, so maybe not as appealing as it seems at first glance.
Maybe not, yeah.
All right, so we've covered annexation, contracting with Shoreline. What about that third option, creating a brand new Edmonds Fire Department?
Now that's an interesting one, starting from scratch.
Yeah, I could see that being appealing to some people. That's in control independence.
For sure, but let's be real, starting a fire department from nothing, that's incredibly expensive.
I can imagine.
You've got to buy new equipment, build fire stations, hire and train people.
It adds up quickly.
It does, and in fact, the report actually estimates that this would be the most expensive option by far.
Wow, okay, so not exactly the most fiscally responsible choice,
Probably not.
especially when you consider the other options, which seem a lot smoother, less risky.
And you've got the backing of an established organization like the RFA.
Right, like why reinvent the wheel?
Exactly.
Okay, so that leaves us with that last option, separating fire and EMS services. So, contracting with a private ambulance company for EMS, but potentially maintaining some form of fire department for fire suppression.
Yeah.
Is that even a viable path for Edmonds?
It's an option, I guess, but it creates a lot of fragmentation.
How so?
Well, you'd have different organizations responsible for fire and EMS, and that can lead to communication issues, potentially slower response times.
Right, because they're not working as one cohesive unit.
Exactly. It's not an ideal scenario.
Sounds like it could get a little chaotic in an emergency.
It could. Plus, there's also the whole issue of EMS funding and delivery, which is a really complex topic nationwide.
Right.
Yeah, private ambulance companies, they often face a lot of challenges, like low pay for EMTs and paramedics, high turnover, and this focus on profit margins, which can sometimes come at the expense of patient care.
That's a little concerning.
It can be, yeah.
So it sounds like separating fire and EMS might not be the best solution for Edmonds.
It's hard to see how it would be better than joining the RFA, honestly.
Right. The RFA, they offer this more integrated approach. It's more cost effective.
But it's publicly accountable, which is a big plus.
Definitely.
So, yeah, all things considered, the RFA seems like the stronger option.
It's about looking at the whole picture, right?
Exactly, making the choice that will truly serve the community best.
In the long run.
Yep, that's the key.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but I think we need to dig a little deeper into some of those concerns people are raising,
Good idea. Let's address those head on.
especially those worries about rising costs.
Absolutely. Let's get into the details.
Because, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there.
There is, and we need to separate fact from fiction.
Exactly. So let's do that. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the RFA's budget and really understand what's going on.
Let's do it. It's funny. Some people think that if Edmonds stays independent, somehow they'll avoid these rising costs, like they're wishing for the good old days. But the reality is, providing good fire and EMS service, it costs money, and it's going up everywhere.
Yeah, it's not like Edmonds is unique in that way.
Right,
It's
exactly.
kind of like wishing for a unicorn to solve your transportation problem.
Uh-huh, exactly. It sounds nice, but it's not very practical.
Mhm.
And that's where the RFA, they kind of get it. They're not just dealing with these costs, they're managing them. Smart budgeting, leveraging their size to get good deals on equipment and supplies.
That's the bulk buying strategy, right?
Exactly. You buy more, you pay less per unit.
Makes sense.
And since they're serving multiple communities, they can spread those costs out. Makes it more efficient for everyone.
So it's not just about looking at the RFA's overall budget number. It's about breaking it down. Cost per resident, cost per service call.
Exactly. And when you look at it that way, the RFA is very competitive.
Okay, but let's talk about those budget increases for a second.
Sure.
Because, people see those numbers and they get nervous.
Right. They think, oh no, my taxes are going up.
But those increases, they're not just about keeping the lights on, right?
No, they're about investing in the future of fire and EMS services.
Yeah.
They're funding things like hiring more firefighters and paramedics, keeping up with that growing demand, right?
Yeah, more people, more calls.
Exactly. And they're upgrading equipment, making sure everything is top-notch.
Safety, effectiveness,
All of that.
and training. Can't forget about training.
Right. Got to keep those skills sharp.
It's like investing in a high-quality car.
Sure.
Yeah, the initial cost might be a little higher, but you get better performance, more reliability. It's safer.
Exactly. And think about it. These costs would be there no matter what. If Edmonds goes solo, they'll face the same pressures.
Maybe even greater, right? Because they don't have that, the size, the leverage.
Economies of scale, yeah.
It's like trying to compete with Amazon, but you're just a tiny little mom and pop shop.
Right. You might have all the heart in the world, but you're not going to match their prices or their efficiency.
Tough competition.
It is.
So this decision for Edmonds, it's a big one.
It is. It's about choosing a path that ensures those fire and EMS services are sustainable, but also being smart about costs.
Okay, so sustainability, that's a good word.
Yeah.
And, we got to talk about the RFA's track record.
Yeah.
They consistently deliver high-quality fire and EMS services.
They do. To other communities in the region, proven track record.
It's not just talk, it's action.
Exactly.
They've got the experience, the trained workforce,
They invest in the latest technology, equipment,
and they've got that system for determining response times and staffing levels.
data-driven best practices.
It's reassuring, Edmonds wouldn't be taking a gamble with the RFA.
Not at all. They're joining an organization that's already proven itself.
So it's not just about maintaining the status quo, it's about potentially improving things.
That's right. Better access to resources, more expertise.
A stronger system overall.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered the money, the service quality, some of the concerns. Anything else we should consider before we wrap up?
One more thing. I think it's important to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture of EMS funding and delivery nationwide.
Oh, right. We have that article about the challenges private ambulance services are facing.
Exactly. It's a tough landscape out there.
Low pay for EMTs and paramedics, burnout.
Not enough resources. It's a real problem.
And that's why the RFA model stands out, right?
Yeah.
Publicly funded, publicly operated.
That's stable, more reliable.
Those private companies, they're focused on profits.
Which can lead to cutting corners, lower quality care.
Not good.
Nope, not when it comes to emergency services.
It really highlights the importance of having a system like the RFA.
Absolutely. People before profits, especially for essential services like EMS.
So when you compare those two models, the RFA really shines.
It does. It's a beacon of stability and quality in a system that's often, well, kind of messed up.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And it's something Edmonds residents should really consider as they make their decision.
It's about choosing a path that benefits everyone, not just the bottom line.
That's what it's all about.
Okay, so we've looked at the finances, the service quality, the broader context. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We've given people a lot to think about.
Exactly. Now, as we wrap up, I want to go back to that consultant report for a second.
Okay.
Remember how they emphasized data-driven decision-making.
Oh, yeah, that was a big part of their
It
message.
was like their guiding principle almost.
Grounding decisions in facts, evidence, not just gut feelings.
And they didn't just talk about it, they actually did it.
Right, they analyzed Edmonds' demographics, the risks, the service
A
needs.
whole picture.
Very thorough, very objective.
It's refreshing to see that kind of approach, you know.
It is. It brings clarity, transparency.
Makes you feel like the decisions are being made for the right reasons.
Exactly, based on solid evidence, not just politics.
Okay, so we've revisited the consultant's emphasis on data. Now I think it's time for our final thoughts as we wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good. Let's bring it all together. So, big picture time. We've looked at all the angles, crunched the numbers, weighed the pros and cons. What have we learned? What should Edmonds residents be thinking about as they make this decision about their fire and EMS services?
Yeah, it's decision time, right? What's the takeaway here?
Well, to me, it seems pretty clear. Joining the South County Fire RFA, that's the most logical choice.
Okay, makes sense. The consultant report definitely leaned that way.
It did, yeah, and for good reason. Cost savings, shared resources, the RFA's track record, it all adds up.
It's about getting the most bang for your buck, right?
Exactly. You want those services to be top-notch, but you also don't want to be throwing money away.
And let's be real, the RFA, they have proven they can deliver.
Oh.
They're invested in their workforce. They've got the latest equipment. They're constantly training.
You're not cutting corners, that's for sure.
Okay, so the financial side, that's a big part of it. But this decision, it's about more than just money.
It is. It's about the well-being of the whole community.
Right, it's about safety. It's about peace of mind.
Exactly. And the RFA, they get that. They're not just about responding to emergencies. They're about preventing them in the first place.
Oh yeah, they do a lot of community outreach, education.
Fire prevention, disaster preparedness, they're really involved.
So it's like they're not just a fire department, they're a partner.
That's a good way to put it. They're invested in the community.
And, you know, some people worry about losing control if they join the RFA. But the RFA, they're governed by elected officials, right?
They are, and those officials, they answer to the communities they serve.
So Edmonds residents would still have a say.
Absolutely. It's not like they're giving up their voice.
Plus, you could argue they might even have more influence as part of a larger organization.
That's a good point. Strength in numbers.
Okay, so we've talked about the benefits, addressed some concerns.
But there's one more thing I want to mention.
What's that?
The potential for lower property taxes.
Oh, wow. Okay, now you've got my attention.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility. Because the RFA, they're so efficient, they're able to spread costs out over a wider base.
So Edmonds could actually end up saving money in the long run.
That's the idea. Better services, greater stability, and potentially lower taxes.
That's a pretty compelling argument.
It is. It's about making a smart investment in the future of Edmonds.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the message is pretty clear. The choice is ultimately up to the residents of Edmonds. But the facts, the evidence, it all points in one direction.
Joining the RFA, it's the most logical, the most financially sound, and the most community-oriented option.
It's about making a decision that benefits everyone.
Exactly. It's about the long-term well-being of the entire community.
Well said. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope you found this exploration informative and insightful. We encourage you to stay engaged, stay curious, and keep diving deep into the issues that matter to you. Thanks for joining us. There was